Your profit margins are too low, and I can see at least 3 areas for immediate cost cutting, the man in the designer blazer said, tapping rapidly on his tablet. Starting with employee compensation. I sat there, stunned. Across the desk sat Ethan Colburn, the newly assigned district manager from Northmark Pet Healthcare Group, calmly explaining that my 15 years of service at Seaside Shores Veterinary Center in Charleston, South Carolina, was now worth exactly 58% of my current pay. Nothing personal, Dr. Marley. Just business, he added with a rehearsed smile. We need to bring your compensation in line with industry benchmarks. My name is Danielle Marley. I'm 44 years old, and I've spent nearly half my life devoted to the care of animals in this coastal community. What began as a post-graduation job at a small, privately owned clinic had grown into a full-fledged calling. I wasn't just a veterinarian. I was a fixture in the community. I'd helped transform the clinic from a modest operation into one of the most trusted animal care centers in the area. I understand this is a transition period, I replied carefully, though my heart was pounding in my chest. When would these new changes take effect? Next pay cycle, he said without emotion, eyes already returning to the glow of his screen. We'll need your decision by Thursday. When Dr. Samuels, the clinic's founder, decided to retire and sell the practice, we had our doubts. But he'd reassured us over dinner that Northmark understood what we'd built. They'll honor the heart of this place, he'd said. They get it. Now, only 3 weeks after the sale was finalized, I was being told to accept a massive salary cut or walk away from the very place that had become my second home. I had trained every technician here. I knew hundreds of pets by name. I was the vet people asked for by name, Dr. Marley, because they trusted me with their companions. Thank you for your transparency, I said, rising from my seat. You'll have my answer by Thursday. Oh, and Danielle, Ethan called out as I reached the door. We're rolling out a new scheduling system next week. The training documents are in your inbox. Out at the front desk, I found Grace, our receptionist of 11 years, typing in updates to a patient's chart. Her eyes met mine with a mix of worry and quiet understanding. You too? I asked softly. She nodded. 35% cut. And my hours are being slashed. What are you going to do? Veterinarian over lunch the next day, I sat across from Thomas Reyes, our newest team member. At just 32, Thomas had joined Crescent Hills Animal Hospital 6 months ago after leaving a corporate-run practice in Nashville. It always starts the same, he said, nodding grimly. Cost cutting. Then efficiency improvements. Then pressure to upsell services. And the care quality? I asked, though deep down I already knew the answer. Everything becomes about numbers, he said, pushing his salad around. How many patients you can see per hour? How many services you convince clients to add? How much revenue you bring in per shift? He looked up, his eyes tired. I left because I got sick of being told to recommend unnecessary dental cleanings just to meet monthly targets. I couldn't do that to people. Or their pets. Later that afternoon, between appointments, I stepped into my office and dialed a familiar number. Dr. Malcolm Harrington, the founder of our clinic, had retired just 3 months earlier and sold the practice to Vetrika Health Group. He now lived by a quiet lake in upstate Kentucky, fishing and finally writing the veterinary memoir he'd always talked about. I had no idea, Sophie, he said when I told him what was happening. His voice was heavy with regret. Their reps swore up and down that they respected the culture we'd built. I would never have signed that deal if I'd known. It's not your fault, I said gently. You earned your retirement. I need to figure out what's next. What are you thinking? I paused. The idea had been taking shape for days, but saying it aloud would make it real. I'm considering opening my own practice. The silence on the other end lasted just long enough to make me second-guess myself. Then Malcolm said, You should. You've got the experience. The client trust. And this city needs a clinic that puts care before corporate margins. After we hung up, I sat in my chair, looking at the framed degrees on the wall. My mind drifted back to the countless conversations I'd had with pet owners over the years. They'd often told me how grateful they were that our clinic didn't feel like an assembly line. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. It was Maggie, our lead technician for the past 8 years. "Sorry to interrupt, Dr. Brenner," she said. "But Mrs. Pemberton is here with Baxter. She asked for you specifically, even though she's scheduled with Dr. Young today." I smiled. "Tell her I'll be right there." As I walked into the exam room to greet Baxter, a 10-year-old beagle I'd cared for since his first vaccinations, I felt something shift in me. The decision was no longer just about a paycheck. It was about honoring the trust people had placed in me and protecting the integrity of what I'd built. By Friday morning, I had a plan. I'd spent the past few nights researching lease options in the Ashford district, calculating costs for equipment, and reviewing small business loan packages. I'd even reached out to 3 former classmates who'd successfully launched their own independent clinics. The more I planned, the more confident I felt. At 9 a.m. sharp, I knocked on Brian's office door. "Come in," he called, distracted. He was mid-call, back turned partially to the screen. "I'll call you back," he said, ending the meeting. "Dr. Brenner." "Good. Have you made your decision?" "I have," I said, handing him a sealed envelope. "This is my 2 weeks' notice." His eyebrows lifted in surprise. "You're quitting over a standard market adjustment?" "I'm pursuing a new opportunity," I said calmly. "And I wanted to give you proper notice to transition my patients." He leaned back in his chair. "Honestly, I expected this kind of thing from the techs or front desk staff. But not from you. You've been in this field a long time. This is just how corporate transitions work. People have to adapt." "I understand business realities," I said, my voice firm. "And I've made a business decision of my own." Brian reached for the letter with a resigned sigh. "We'll have HR start your offboarding paperwork." "I assume you'll be joining another practice?" Brian asked, casually leaning back in his chair. "Something like that," I answered vaguely. By lunchtime, word of my resignation had spread like wildfire through Crescent Hills Animal Hospital. It didn't take long for Valerie, Maggie, and Thomas to each find a moment to pull me aside. "Is it true?" Valerie asked, her voice low as we stood by the filing cabinets, just out of earshot of the front desk. "Yes," I said with a small nod. "My last day is 2 weeks from today." "What will you do?" she pressed gently. I paused, then decided to trust her. "I'm opening my own practice. I've been looking at a space over on Maple Avenue." Her eyes lit up. She leaned in closer. "Really? Wow." She looked around cautiously and lowered her voice even more. "That's amazing, Sophie." All day, I had similar conversations. Some whispered, some direct. Thomas stopped me between appointments, expression earnest. "Keep me posted," he said, voice quiet but purposeful. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table, a legal pad in front of me, scribbling lists and rough sketches of exam room layouts. My tea had gone cold beside me when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Maggie. "Whatever you're planning, count me in." I smiled at the screen, heart thudding with a mixture of fear and excitement. But it wasn't until my 3rd cup of hot tea that the full weight of the day hit me. Just as I was leaving the clinic, Mrs. Davidson had stopped me in the parking lot. Her cat, Oliver, had been my patient since she adopted him 6 years ago. Her face was pale, drawn with concern. "I overheard one of the texts," she said. Are you leaving?" I nodded, not wanting to dodge the truth. "Yes." "Where are you going?" she asked immediately. "Because Oliver and I will follow you there." That one sentence, so simple, yet so powerful, struck me hard. It was loyalty. Real, heartfelt loyalty. I wasn't just a veterinarian to these people. I was their veterinarian. And that bond? It mattered. More than any spreadsheet Brian could wave in front of me. More than any industry benchmark salary cut. That night, staring at my notes and business plan outlines, I felt a clarity I hadn't known I needed. This wasn't just about leaving. It was about building something that deserved the trust these people had given me. The next 2 weeks felt like the longest stretch of my entire 14-year career. I remained professional, giving every pet the attention and care they needed. But the tension was unmistakable. Brian had started hovering outside exam rooms, pretending to take efficiency notes. He scheduled an exit interview on my last day and began emailing friendly reminders about my obligations under the non-solicitation clause. Thankfully, a lawyer friend from college reviewed the document and reassured me, under Kentucky law, the clause was loosely worded and largely unenforceable, especially considering I hadn't poached anyone. People were choosing to follow me. What Brian didn't know was that I had already signed the lease on a storefront 7 minutes across town. The space had once been a pediatrician's office, which made adapting it for veterinary care much easier. The financing had been secured through Ashford Community Bank, where I'd banked for over 10 years. They believed in local businesses, and more importantly, they believed in me. Even my longtime medical supplier had stepped up. "We've seen what happens when Vetrica takes over," the rep told me over lunch. "We're here to support you." At the clinic, I kept my plans quiet. Officially, but the whispers were growing. "So, where exactly will your new practice be?" Mrs. Thompson asked, while I examined her terrier's ear infection. "I haven't finalized anything just yet," I replied, careful with my words, and with the new computer system's microphone recently installed above the exam tables, because I knew the real answer, and I'd be ready to share it soon. Part of Vetrica's quality assurance program, the receptionist muttered, her tone dripping with sarcasm. She glanced around before leaning closer. "Well, when you do open, please let me know. Max won't see anyone else." These conversations became a daily occurrence. Each one, each quiet comment, each loyal glance, only solidified my resolve. This wasn't just a career move. It was a fight to protect the quality of care this community depended on. That Wednesday, during my final week at Crescent Hills, Brian summoned me back to his office. His usual composed, corporate demeanor was replaced with something sharper, less assured. "Several clients have been asking about your future plans," he said, skipping the pleasantries. "I need to remind you of your contractual obligations." "I'm well aware," I answered calmly. "And I've been clear with everyone. I have nothing concrete to announce." He tapped a sleek black pen against his desk, eyes narrowing. "We've invested a considerable sum in acquiring this clinic, Dr. Brenner. Vetrica doesn't take kindly to anything that undermines that investment." "I understand," I said, still composed. "Is there anything else?" He studied me for a moment. Then, almost reluctantly, "We're prepared to reconsider your compensation package." Perhaps we were too aggressive with the initial adjustment. The offer caught me off guard. For the first time, it seemed Vetrica realized they may have misjudged the heartbeat of this clinic. But it was too late. The lease for my new space on Riverbank Drive was already signed. The equipment was ordered. And Riverbank Animal Hospital was no longer just a dream, it was forming, brick by brick. "I appreciate that, Brian," I said. "But my decision is made." Later that afternoon, Valerie passed by my office and discreetly placed a folded note on my desk. Inside was a handwritten list of 20 client names. At the bottom, she'd scrawled a single sentence. "These people called today asking for you. When you're ready to hire a receptionist, call me first." That evening, I met Thomas and Maggie at a quiet coffee shop well outside the clinic's reach. Over warm lattes and hushed voices, I finally laid it all out. "I've secured a location on Riverbank Drive," I said. "It'll be called Riverbank Animal Hospital. If everything stays on track, we're opening in 6 weeks." 6 weeks, Maggie repeated, her brow furrowed. "Interesting timing. That's when my reduced hours start." Thomas leaned forward, a grin forming. "What's your staffing plan?" "I need a veterinarian who shares my values," I replied, meeting his eyes. "And a lead tech who believes that care comes before profit." Their smiles said it all. Before the night was over, my new clinic had unofficially gained its first 2 team members. The pieces were falling into place. But I had no idea that Vetrika was about to force my hand in a way I hadn't expected. The second to last day of my time at Crescent Hills began with an ugly surprise. On the break room bulletin board was a brand new fee schedule, posted without warning. Effective immediately, prices for nearly every service had been raised by 30%. Basic vaccinations had jumped from $45 to $65. Standard dental cleanings were now $425, up from $300. And most troubling of all were the new bundled packages, services marketed as wellness plans, but filled with tests and screenings that were rarely needed for healthy pets. The boldest package included 3 separate panels under the heading Comprehensive Senior Wellness, which would now be required for any pet over 7. "They're not even pretending anymore," whispered Jenna, a junior vet who had joined just after the acquisition. "Dr. Young already told me we're supposed to recommend the premium package to everyone. No exceptions." My stomach turned. This wasn't about efficiency anymore. It was exploitation. Later that morning, when Mrs. Whitaker brought in her elderly tabby, Chairman Meow, for a routine arthritis checkup, I found myself stuck between my oath and a price tag. The new protocol demanded I recommend a $350 senior panel that he didn't need. And in that moment, I knew. This wasn't just about starting something new. It was about protecting what veterinary medicine was always meant to be. $500? "But we just ran those tests 2 months ago," Mrs. Whitaker said, her concern etched deeply across her face. "Is this really necessary again so soon?" I understood. She lived on a fixed income and budgeted carefully to care for Chairman Meow, her elderly rescue tabby. She wasn't trying to cut corners. She just wanted to do right by her cat without falling behind on her bills. "The new owners have implemented standardized protocols," I said carefully, keeping my voice neutral. "But in my professional opinion, based on Chairman's recent results, we could easily wait another 4 months before repeating these tests." She looked visibly relieved, her shoulders relaxing as she gently stroked Chairman's head. But my moment of professional integrity was short-lived. Without warning, Brian Hayes stepped into the exam room, holding a clipboard and wearing his signature plastic smile. He'd been monitoring the appointment remotely through the new electronic system, something we'd all quietly resented since it was installed. "Mrs. Whitaker, I'm Brian Hayes, the regional manager with Vetrika Health Group," he said, his voice smooth but unmistakably rehearsed. "I couldn't help but notice that we haven't scheduled Chairman's senior wellness package today." What followed was a carefully worded performance, implications that skipping these tests might delay early detection, subtle hints that responsible pet owners wouldn't risk it, and a generous, one-time discount that still rang up far above what the tests should actually cost. I watched Mrs. Whitaker go from confused to uncertain, to resigned. "I suppose, if you think it's best," she murmured, her hand tightening around her purse strap. After she left, Brian pulled me aside just outside the exam room. His tone changed entirely. "Dr. Brenner, when we recommend a protocol, we expect full support from our veterinarians." I met his gaze. "Those tests aren't necessary right now. This isn't about patient care, it's about squeezing more money out of every visit." "This is about standardized care," he replied coldly. "You're letting your emotional attachment to clients interfere with your clinical judgment." I almost laughed at the absurdity. "That emotional attachment is called trust, Brian. It's the reason this clinic has been successful for decades." He glanced at his watch with thinly veiled irritation. "Thankfully, we only have to manage that perspective for one more day." The rest of the day followed a grim rhythm. Brian hovered at nearly every appointment, watching like a hawk, and stepping in any time I didn't push the new protocols to his satisfaction. By closing time, I was emotionally drained. As I updated Chairman Meow's file, something strange caught my eye. In the notes section, a recent administrative entry read, "Patient transferred to Dr. Young effective immediately. Dr. Brenner no longer primary veterinarian." My stomach dropped. I quickly checked several other long-time patient records. Same note. One after another, my regulars' families I'd cared for over a decade were being reassigned before I'd even left. That night, I couldn't sleep. I'd planned to leave quietly, open Riverbank Animal Hospital at my own pace, and let clients find me naturally. But Vetrica's scorched earth tactics forced my hand. At 2 a.m., I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. Subject: Need to accelerate timeline. To Rachel Mandel, JD. How soon can we open, even in limited capacity? Her reply came within the hour. With temporary equipment rental and weekend scheduling, we could go live in as little as 2 weeks. Call me first thing. I exhaled for the first time all night. Finally, something that felt like forward motion. Tomorrow would be my last day at Crescent Hills Animal Hospital, but it wouldn't go the way Brian Hayes thought it would. My final morning began with a sense of both closure and anticipation. I'd already made the early phone calls, set the legal and logistical wheels in motion. As I pulled into the lot for the last time, the clinic's signs seemed smaller somehow. Inside, the morning passed in a series of tearful goodbyes from colleagues who had become like family: Valerie, Maggie, even Thomas, who whispered, "I'm ready when you are." And though many of the newer staff barely knew me, even they seemed shaken by what the clinic was becoming. The air was thick with a quiet knowing. Something was ending, but something better was about to begin. The schedule looks light today, Valerie noted as I stopped by the reception desk. I glanced at the screen. Yeah, only 4 appointments. Strange for a Friday. Brian blocked off most of your day for transition activities, I added, offering a faint smile. Apparently, there's a mountain of paperwork to complete before I walk out the door. What neither of us said was the obvious. Nearly all my regular clients had already been reassigned to other vets, quietly and systematically. At noon, Brian summoned me to the conference room for what he called a departure protocol meeting. I expected the typical exit interview checklist: returning keys, signing off on HR forms, maybe a brief thank you for your service. Instead, I walked in to find Brian seated with 2 people I didn't recognize. One was introduced as Vetrica's regional legal counsel, a sharp-featured woman in her 50s with a steely gaze. The other, a man in a muted suit, was their HR director. "Before we process your departure," Brian began, his tone clipped and formal, "we need to address some concerns." The attorney slid a folder across the table. "It's come to our attention," she said, "that you may be planning to open a competing veterinary practice in the Ashford area. This is a cease and desist letter, enforcing a 1-year non-compete within a 20-mile radius of this facility." I looked down at the letter but didn't touch it. "I don't recall signing a non-compete agreement," I said calmly. "It was included in the transition documents all employees signed after the Vetrica acquisition," she replied with polished certainty. "Actually," I said, reaching into my bag, "I have a full set of those documents right here." I pulled out a thick folder and placed it on the table. My attorney reviewed them. "There's no non-compete clause, not even in the fine print." The mood in the room shifted. Brian's expression lost some of its smugness. "And for the record," I continued, "Kentucky law significantly limits the enforceability of non-competes for medical professionals, especially veterinarians, when patient welfare is involved." The legal counsel and HR director exchanged a tense glance. Brian fumbled for a response. "We're not here to debate legal technicalities," he said quickly. "We just want to ensure a smooth transition for our clients." "Your former clients," I corrected, keeping my tone even. "And yes, I agree, continuity of care is important." Sensing the shift, the HR director adopted a more conciliatory approach. "Dr. Brenner, we understand you've been with Crescent Hills for many years. Perhaps there's a solution that works for everyone." I smiled. I'm always open to reasonable solutions. What followed was nearly 2 hours of tense negotiation. Eventually, we reached a written agreement. I wouldn't actively solicit any of Crescent Hills' clients for a period of 30 days, and in return, Vetrika would not pursue any claim against my practice location or opening schedule. By the time we wrapped up, I had officially completed my final obligation to Crescent Hills Animal Hospital. I gathered my few remaining personal items, photos of patients, thank you cards, a coffee mug from Maggie, and said my goodbyes. Some were tearful. Some were whispered. All were heartfelt. As I pulled out of the parking lot one last time, my phone buzzed with a text from Valerie. Just overheard Brian on the phone with corporate. He said, "She's just one veterinarian. How much impact could her leaving possibly have?" I stared at the message and smiled, then typed my reply. I guess we'll find out. What Brian and Vetrika didn't understand was that I wasn't just leaving. I was launching. Riverbank Animal Hospital opened its doors exactly 17 days after I left Crescent Hills. It took round-the-clock effort, temporary rental equipment, and creative scheduling to make it happen. But we did it. And on day one, we were booked solid. It took temporary rentals, long nights, and a skeleton crew working double shifts, but we pulled it off. Thomas officially joined me as our second veterinarian. Maggie came aboard as lead technician after her hours at Crescent Hills were cut back to part-time. And Valerie? She handed in her notice the same day the new reception desk was installed, her resignation letter citing Vetrika's hostile work environment in bold. Our first day at Riverbank Animal Hospital was intended to be a soft opening. Just a handful of appointments, a chance to shake out the new system before the official launch the following week. I had only reached out personally to about 20 longtime clients, ones whose pets needed continued care. Those were the only calls I'd made. So at 8:45 a.m., 15 minutes before opening, when I peeked out the window and saw a line of people and pets stretching across our little parking lot and down the sidewalk, my jaw dropped. "Did you call all these people?" Thomas asked, eyes wide. "No," I replied, stunned. "I only contacted a few with urgent needs." Inside, Valerie was already at the reception desk, logging into our new cloud-based system. She looked up with a smile. I think word got around. When we opened the doors, the flood began. Mrs. Pemberton came in with Baxter the Beagle. The Garza family brought their 3 rescue cats. Mr. Johnson arrived carefully cradling his ancient tortoise, Methuselah. "Everyone's been talking about it," Mrs. Pemberton explained. "We saw it on the neighborhood Facebook group. No one wanted to miss your first day." By lunchtime, we had registered over 70 pets. By closing, that number had more than doubled. Everyone shared the same message. They followed their veterinarian, not the clinic name. The part that moved me most wasn't the volume. It was the support. Clients brought homemade cookies, handwritten cards, bouquets of flowers. One family brought lunch, 2 large pizzas, just to say congratulations. That evening, as we locked the doors and collapsed into our chairs, buzzing from exhaustion and adrenaline, I got a text from a friend still working at Crescent Hills. "Emergency meeting called tomorrow. Schedule's basically empty." The following week shattered every expectation I'd had. We expanded hours, rushed to hire support staff. By the end of our first month, we had registered over 800 pets, about 70% of Crescent Hills' former client base. But what surprised me more than the numbers was how people found us. We'd done virtually no advertising. Just a basic website, a short post in the Ashford Gazette, and word of mouth. And still, they came, referrals from neighbors, recommendations in pet groups, whispered conversations at the dog park. "The Ashford pet groups have been buzzing about you," one woman said as I examined her Labrador puppy. "Everyone's talking about how you stood up to that corporate chain." That narrative had taken on a life of its own. I never meant to become a symbol of resistance to corporate vet medicine, but somehow I had. People began sharing their experiences at Crescent Hills under Vetrika's rule, skyrocketing prices, unnecessary tests, impersonal care, and contrasted it with what we were offering: transparency, respect, and individualized attention. Then, one afternoon, 3 months in, I got an unexpected visitor. Dr. Malcolm Harrington, my mentor and the man who'd once owned Crescent Hills, walked through the front doors of Riverbank Animal Hospital. I had to see it for myself, he said, looking around with open admiration. You've built something special here, Sophie. We walked through the clinic together. Staff members stopped to shake his hand. Clients greeted him warmly, many sharing how much they missed him and how grateful they were for the new practice. I made a mistake, he said softly, once the tour was complete. Selling to Vetrika. I should have come to you first. I smiled. Everything worked out in the end. It should, I assured him. Later that afternoon, an email popped into my inbox from Brian Hayes. He wanted to schedule a meeting to discuss the veterinary landscape in Ashford. I couldn't help but smile as I typed my reply. I'm available next Tuesday at 2 p.m. Nothing personal, just business. Looking around at the vibrant clinic we'd built, filled with wagging tails, gentle purrs, and a team I trusted, I felt a deep, quiet satisfaction. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't loud or dramatic. Sometimes, it's building the place you were always meant to, and thriving in it. If you've made it this far, thank you for walking this journey with me. I wasn't sure I'd ever tell this story, much less live through it. But here I am, standing on the other side of one of the hardest decisions I've ever made. If my story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below, tell me what part hit home, what reminded you of your own experience, or simply share a few words of support. Your encouragement matters more than you know. To those of you navigating a toxic workplace, facing down impossible choices, or feeling unseen in a profession you've poured your soul into, please listen closely. You are not stuck. I know the fear of starting over. I know what it feels like to question your worth after someone tries to reduce you to a line on a spreadsheet. But I also know the power of choosing yourself. Sometimes walking away isn't quitting, it's beginning. And success isn't always about proving others wrong. Sometimes it's about building something right. What I've learned is this: the most valuable thing you carry isn't your resume or title, it's your integrity. Don't compromise that for anyone. Whether you're a veterinarian like me or in a completely different field, your compassion, your principles, and your connection to the people and animals you serve, that's what makes you irreplaceable. So, if you're standing at your own crossroads right now, I hope my story gives you the courage to take that first step. Even if it's messy, even if it's scary, you deserve to build a life and a career that reflects your values. And if no one else has told you lately, I believe in you. Now, tell me, what would you have done in my shoes?